States rein in health care expenses, insurance expenses, from $1,500 in 2001 to $891 in 2011, inflation adjusted. This was one of the headlines in the USA Today. Actually, it was today's magazine paper, and that was on October 24th, 2011. Well, this is the private sector versus the public sector. The public sector finally has seen a shrinkage in their benefits, finally, because the private sector has been suffering for quite a while. In any case, Wisconsin is trying to force unions to pay just 13% of their health care. Now, when I was at Polaroid Corporation in the early 70s, I used to pay 33% for my family health insurance. 16 years later, in my own company, 5 employees, I paid my employees the same amount for a family plan. This is a paradigm shift that will squeeze the previously unsqueezable public sector. Now, this is unprecedented in decades. In fact, since probably I was born, that we've had such a, let's say, an effort to reduce or at least bring in line the public sector's benefits. This is the new direction for the public sector, but private sectors have been suffering for years, and it's far from over for both sectors. We have to endure a dramatic change in attitude, except Obama wants to spend your future too. Vote for him. He'll give you almost all that you want. Oh, sure. It's an illusory image of untruth. Obama is accelerating toward a welfare-socialism model of Western Europe. He passed Obamacare. Remember the old word that it is not used at all? Socialized medicine? Yes, socialized medicine is what we used to call it here. Not a nary a word since that time. Cost? Well, nearly 20% of our entire GDP, which is gross domestic product, of $16 trillion, or about $3 trillion a year, and this will rise. Why? Remember, he said it's not a tax? Well, the Chief Justice Roberts said it is a tax. So get ready. Your taxes will go up despite claims by Obama or otherwise. He's already recommended in the Senate bill to nationalize student loans, over $1 trillion. The colleges are salivating for this gravy train. Hi, I'm Johnny Straight Talk. If you don't think that line is straight, you're welcome to come to my chair sometime. It's there for all of the progressives, the Democrats, the liberals, leftists, Marxists, whoever you are. Come on in and give another point of view. I'm broadcasting live, but tonight it's not live. I'm in a special studio just because the other studio was being used. Now, in regard to our program tonight, it reminds me of Michael Baroni's quotation. He's a Washington Examiner senior political analyst. He says, government works for the irresponsible, not for the responsible. And this is what the whole Obama presidency is about. So we will now look at the premise first for this evening. There is one goal that President Obama has achieved, and that is to accelerate the USA to a more pervasive welfare socialism economic model of Western Europe. Secondly, students, anyone from 25 years above, this bodes badly for you. You will pay dearly for the unemployment since you graduated, and then in paying down the debt that unfortunately my generation created. It falls on our shoulders for what we've done. And we have to understand you must accept that responsibility. I will not, and I'll tell you why a little later. Okay, let's have some definition of terms. This is from the Merriam-Webster's Dictionary, 10th edition. Welfare state. It was used in 1940, according to the dictionary. I quote, a social system based on the assumption by a political state of primary responsibility for the individual and social welfare of its citizens. Examples: welfare in families. Pregnant teens get welfare. Disability insurance is another welfare program. Social Security. Now, so Social Security originally started with the employer, and it still is, the employer contributing about 6.2% of the person's salary, and the employee pays about actually the same amount, 6.2, so a total of 14.4%. That was a savings program because it was instituted in 1935 by Roosevelt. Well, we've come to find that they decided it was a tax. So it's no longer a savings plan as was discussed at that time. Notice the progression of the government to more and more control. We have state and federal housing. You have affordable housing here in Massachusetts, and you have federal housing. And of course, there's been a great scandal in Chelsea and other towns about how they've managed that, all because we displace our local responsibility. Then we have unemployment insurance. The employers assume that entire thing, and others like this. These are all administered and controlled by the state and federal government. One famous welfare recipient, Auntie Zatouni, Obama's aunt. She came here maybe 15, 20 years ago illegally. Then she got housing. We found that out. And then all of a sudden, even though she was supposed to have been deported the first time around, she still got housing, free housing, denying our own citizens of free housing. In any case, her case was brought before a court, and then they decided, well, she's okay, she has a disability. So now she's on disability, plus she has free housing. This is not unusual. This is not unusual at all. Now, I'm not talking about able-bodied people. These are the people that should not be on this. Those other people who have a number of different problems is a different story. But this group is growing. Next stage of welfare state, then you get increased welfare state programs, and there's more government control. And that's called socialism. There are many forms of both this welfare state and socialism, and there's a broad line dividing the two. And you'll find this in all different kinds of countries in Western Europe. The definition of these two words, and then they are, and also in practice, they may not be exactly the same. So these definitions I'm giving you are kind of broad, and it varies greatly. So what is socialism? According to the dictionary, 1837 was implemented. Any of various economic and political theories advocating collective or government ownership and administration of the means of production and distribution of goods. A system or group that living in which there is no private property, a stage of society in Marxist theory transitional between capitalism and communism, and distinguished by unequal distribution of goods and pay according to work done. Well, simply, there's just more and more control over the things in society. There is some ownership, and I'll discuss that in a moment here. Ownership of companies in some cases. Not here in America there's that, but there's other things that have happened that bailouts, for example, is one case. Then we have Obamacare, and that is the epitome of what I call socialism. Socialized medicine, and that's what it is. One famous person, Margaret Thatcher, Premier of England in the 1980s, during the time Reagan was around, she said this, and this is really encapsulates the entire meaning. The trouble with socialism is that you run out of money. That's Margaret Thatcher. And it's so true as we see and witness what's happening in Europe. Some foreign country governments own railroads, sometimes as airlines, sometimes as utilities, and the like, but not usually manufacturing, except in communist countries. Socialism truly emphasizes centralization more and more of human activity at a dollar cost that everyone bears, and each individual loses more and more freedom. So you get all these benefits, but you lose all the freedom. And it's really bad for those who are responsible. This is a great government for those who are irresponsible. One thing is clear, regardless of what words you use, you can call these different countries with these two characteristics. Call these different countries with these two characteristics. First, individuals will lose more freedom of choices. And second, there is less and less incentive to take personal responsibility. Why bother if you can get all these other benefits? And that's what it comes down to, even affordable housing. And we'll discuss that another time. There'll be a second program next week on Halloween Eve. Second, there is less and less incentive to take personal responsibility. The further you go from a welfare state to more characteristics of socialism, the more of these two characteristics one finds. For example, in Massachusetts, affordable housing, in which the money comes from the responsible, that's the taxpayers. So what is the incentive for me if I'm on affordable housing, or in affordable housing, to do anything about getting out of that? There's really no incentive whatsoever. You can then spend your money on other things. Let's look at examples. Mortgage company, Fannie and Freddie. Nearly trillions of dollars of liabilities. As a private company, it was taken over by, quote, the government, and they're running it. They're fully liable. It's essentially a nationalized company. Bailouts, GM. Now, when they talk about the auto business being bailed out, they simply, it's inconvenient. Oh, that's great. Gore. It's an inconvenient truth that Ford took not 1 cent from the bailout. Yet you hear Obama talk about the auto industry. Well, Ford essentially was as big as GM, and of course Chrysler was in there at the same time, and so it isn't the automobile business. And that's not telling the whole truth, President Obama. Next, we have AIG, a large multinational insurance company, and they have probably anywhere between $50 to $100 billion they still owe us. That's taken over a company, running that company. Of course, they're claiming that they paid the bill, but I don't see that in any writing anywhere. Financial institutions. Do you know today those financial institutions which were designated as too big to fail, and that's why we had to bail them out? There are now similar institutions that are as big, in fact bigger than before, and they're too big to fail. So if we ever get to this situation again, we'll have another thing where management leaves without any kind of accountability. On top of that, they give themselves bonuses. Even though I'm president of my company, I can criticize them because they're really a disgrace to our business climate of those who do operate their businesses properly. The ultimate example of socialism, never in U.S. history, and that is socialized medicine. As I mentioned earlier, those who take care of themselves will pay for those who don't. Remember Baroni? The government works for the irresponsible, not responsible. And that's what the whole story is. A tendency of any government program is to get bigger, and that's what they're doing. They want control over you. Panels. There'll be panels of people, professionals, who will decide which procedure in this Obamacare, which procedure in those who can't get it. Most likely people like myself. You know, I know you'd miss me, I'm sure. The liberals would love it. Intent is to reduce the number of elderly patients and make their lives shorter. Give them assisted suicide treatment. It's all about power over us, and that's what it comes down to. Now, President Obama believes in these principles: more redistribution, more welfare, and less personal responsibility and socialism. It bodes badly for those who are responsible. Now let's look at a series of examples to illustrate my viewpoint during the past 4 years especially. And I'll be going down this particular route today, and we'll start with the first one, which is federal debt and continuing deficits. That's the worst one at this point in time, in our history probably, except for the Great Depression. The federal deficit, that means the accumulated amount of money that the government owes from one yearly budget to the next. And the states have to balance their budget. By law, they have deficits, they have to raise taxes, fees, or get donations. The federal government has no balanced budget, and they can raise funds how? By simply printing the money. More and more overload the money supply, and eventually inflation gets very bad. And there's no limit. The federal government can borrow without limits, borrow or raise taxes within a calendar year to pay right now that one owes as a federal government or at any given quantity or any given moment. Obama has added $1 trillion per year, $1 trillion per year since he's been in office. Remember how he wanted a second stimulus a couple of years ago in addition to the $830 billion that was approved by Congress? That was the first stimulus. Now, he's had a stimulus even bigger than the first one every year. And if you add up the total number of trillions of dollars he's added since the beginning of his term, he's added close to $5.2 trillion more. Just 4 years. That's why he never passed a budget, or at least he proposed budgets, but they were never passed in 3 years. Because if he had a budget to pass, then he would have to reduce his spending. That's why he didn't want to pass a budget. Federal debt. Slide 1, please. The federal debt is a total of all past surpluses of deficits. You see on the slide, the GDP, that's gross domestic product. It is a total amount of all sales and services transactions in the USA. And the percent of GDP is simply federal debt divided by GDP. And let's use an example which is pretty current. We have $16 trillion in federal debt. That is the amount of money we owe all kinds of people, China, Japan. We owe both of those countries roughly $2.5 trillion. And then you have the GDP, which is the gross domestic product. So we got 100%. Now that's an important measure because we find that countries use that as a degree of knowing how close you are to insolvency. And I have a next chart coming up. Please, next chart, please. Okay. Now this chart here was produced by a gentleman who is an economist. He likes to do this kind of work. And he is on the left side, strongly on the left, because I looked at his entire website, and so all he does is criticize the Republicans, which is fine. So I'm using his data to prove what my point is. The 100% is where it says September 30th, 2012. That's draw a line over, and it's 100%. So the amount of people that we owe money to and the amount of all of the goods and services we have are about equal. Next slide, please. This is the best slide. This is from the Heritage Corporation, which is a conservative organization. I could not find a slide that was up to date. This is 2011, but it's a great slide to show you where we're going. Graphic. There's nothing better than a graph like that. It tells you all the stories in one simple chart. Now, Obama has actually increased the debt from 10 trillion up to 16 trillion within his administration. Please keep the slide up. So let's look at it. Right now you see 2011 U.S. debt is 67 GDP. Now this is from I presume that this is pretty close to what it was in 2011. But notice the countries there. You have Spain, which is in serious trouble. They're probably up to 60, 70%. Then you have us at 100. UK is having great difficulty. Not as much as Spain, but you go by the numbers. People out there demonstrating in Spain, I haven't seen that in the UK. Italy, not as much, but we have the same problem as Italy, essentially. And Italy has got all kinds of austerity measures going on, cutting back on their retirements, which are probably about 60, and we're at 65. Japan now is up to 70. So Italy has been, eating leisurely in many different restaurants, and it's part of the problem. They've had all kinds of benefits. For all these countries here, we've provided them security with our military. What have they given us in return? They pull out their forces. As soon as a gun is shot, a person is shot once, or fighting starts, they take off. Spain was one of them. They had one terrorist attack in the subway, and all of a sudden they're gone. That's all they want to commit. This is why I'm against protecting our allies in many ways. At least give us some money. What they've done with the savings is simply bought all these other entitlements. I mean, that's how they've gotten all these extra entitlements. They're spending their money that they should be spending, giving it to us. Keep the slide up, please. The worst one is Greece. Greece is seriously in trouble. They have more debt than us. They have serious riots. They're likely to go under and not be part of the EU. So we see an end to what happens when you don't control what you're spending. Excessive spending is a problem with all these countries. And the driving force is everybody wants something for nothing. I mean, it happens here. Everyone likes something for nothing. What started this downfall? Well, it's the incompetence of both parties, Democrats and Republicans. I get arguments from people saying, no, it's the Republicans. They were the last ones. It's this, and that's the truth. Both parties have been doing this for a long time under a term called crony capitalism, which that means is the government employees get together with business and conspire against us, because we wouldn't be in this trouble if it wasn't for that relationship that we have. They want you to forget it. Well, they've caused a great recession, and we'll never forget it. And young people will know they'll never forget it. It's the worst since the Depression. They accumulated much more debt than us, these countries. We're getting payback. The payback we're getting the second time around is that 20% of all our exports go to Europe. They're not buying. They're not buying. They're not buying at all. And I said earlier, I'm not part of the problem that has been created. I've been part of a third-party movement, and I've been on this camera for about 3 years, and I've been talking about this. I voted for Perot. I felt that what was happening in 1992, when Perot first started, is just so 100, 1,000, 10, even more times worse than what we had before. And at that time, Perot got 19% of the vote that was split between Clinton, George W. Bush, George H. Herbert Walker Bush, the father, he was there, and they got a little bit more, and Clinton finally won. Perot wasn't the best guy, but he tried, and I still have his spirit within me. I've been fighting for the youth of this world, especially here in this country. Also for those who are younger than me. But the generation, they're not here to defend themselves. They're the problems. And in colleges, you can ask your parents. Straight Talk is saying you guys are part of the problem. And you ask them who they registered. Well, you know what? If you still stay registered as a Democrat and Republican, you are complicit with the problem. You never want to reward anybody with your name. Never. Because they have all kinds of lists. Oh, we have 30% of this, 20% of these people here. They're all behind us. Get smart. Do not give any kind of trust to either party. I belong to the Constitution Party. I'm an independent. Okay. I have just about 5 minutes. As far as the conclusion, let's go with this. Our inability to recover from this crisis results from two factors. These are two worst factors that we have. There are a number of others that I will talk about. We have some others too right now that are causing a problem very deep. Housing. Housing has been depressed as almost no other time for this length of time. And so we've had kind of like the eclipse of the sun in this situation. All the wrong things have happened together. Secondly, another point is that 70% of our economy is driven by people who work. They're the spenders. Of course, we've had too much of that. Those people, excuse me, are not spending. And guess why they're not spending? Because there aren't any jobs. It's a circular problem, really deep. And how long will it take to straighten this out? I really don't know. This could be the worst catastrophe for this country ever, far exceeding the Great Depression in terms of amount of money lost. And I say to you, this is official from a couple of different sources, most families have lost, on average, 39%, let's call it 40% of their net worth. Their housing, you've put all the assets together, 40%. Many want to deny that, but you know why it's true is because they're still working, especially people like myself. I'm still working beyond my retirement age. And so I wish the youth the best, and I say to them, you'll never forget this, especially the 50% are unemployed. You'll never forget this, and remember, I'm one of the many voices that have spoken to you about the liberal influence of college professors. They want you to continue down that track. Give them the yes them to death, but follow something completely different, because you're paying for the sins of your parents, who also never came here to speak about this. So the next program will be part 2 of the same thing, and I'll be talking about education. I'll be talking about a number of other factors that have caused our problem and how we're continually are accelerating. Obama is accelerating us into another type of world power, one that's going to be shackled by this debt. If China ever wants, we're threatening China for different things, bad news, because they can simply get rid of their debt in one way or another and not invest anymore. And that will be bad news. But actually, that's the best thing. We need more medicine to change our minds, because you're not going to get the truth from the politicians who want you to forget this whole deal. They want you to vote for them. You've got the power to vote. Get unregistered from those 2 major parties. I don't care what you do. Go to Nader's party. Go to some other leftist group. But they are going to take you to a path of perdition, P-E-R-D-I-T-I-O-N. You'll learn some more vocabulary words here. Road to perdition. There's a great economist called Hayek, and Austrian, who wrote a book about this. And so I wish you the best. I'm not hiring any young people because I don't have enough work as it is. So thank you for this evening, and we'll be at it again on, this time live, on Halloween. And it won't be any jokes. So good night. Pleasure talking to you. Now I'll go to my paper again and see what else I can find.